Hello, Assalamualaikum, and welcome back to another podcast with Fark Padta Hai. Today we have a very special guest here with us, Miss Musarrad Kadeem, who is the co-founder and executive director at Payman Trust, a pioneer organization in preventing and countering violent extremism in Pakistan, which has received international recognition and applauds for its innovative model of neutralizing extremist tendencies through community mediation, active citizenship, and community empowerment. Assalamualaikum, ma'am.
Walaikum
Thank you so
salam.
much for joining us today here. And we would love to know your insights on communities' involvement in peace building and counter violent extremism. So, any introductory words that you would like to share with our audience today?
Bahut shukriya. Thank you so much for inviting me to this very important podcast. Of course, we just say that if you are really serious in preventing violent extremism, you have to empower the community. You have to engage the communities. You have to actually build their capacity to understand the early signs of radicalization, not only in individual but in the whole of communities. And I think it is the community for preventing violent extremism. The local communities are extremely important because you really need to leverage the local trust, the local the networks and the local dynamics and the local culture. Only then you will be able to address the issue of violent extremism effectively and sustainably.
Hmm. So, while you were talking about empowering communities, through your extensive work, what are the root causes that you have identified, whether social, economical, that lead to that are the basic root causes of violent extremism in our society?
I love this question. The reason for it is that I always say, and I challenge all those writers sitting outside the hot zones of violent extremism and just developing their research thesis, giving the root causes as poverty, as illiteracy, and stuff like that. I always tell that I think poverty, illiteracy, ignorance had been the features of these I think I would say areas who are hard hit by violent extremism today. They had always been grappling with these sort of situations, but there was no violent extremism prevailing in those areas at that time. What happened? All of a sudden, that they have turned to be suicidal attackers, that they have turned to be ready to kill themselves and kill others and harm their communities, the families, and of course everyone around them, and of course in the state of Pakistan as well. So my belief is that it is nothing to do with these root causes or that are being flagged. They are there, but I think the one of the basic root cause that I feel, and because I've been working in this area for the last 18 years now, is somebody, the instigator, who instigates, who actually find an entry point through the gaps that exist in these communities. And that's why that becomes the root cause. Otherwise it is the instigator who is so influencer, the instigator who is so strategic, the instigator who is so well versed in communicating the grievances and building on those grievances, that all of a sudden we feel we have seen these waves of violent extremism, radicalization in those communities who were extremely peaceful, in spite of the fact that there was no justice, there was no opportunities, economic, social opportunities available to those communities, but there was peace. They were living in total harmony.
It's really important to highlight that just because something exists in the presence of another thing doesn't mean that they're correlated necessarily. So we've talked about this on our podcast before also, that there are many reports that correlate poverty and the lack of employment opportunities to directly being linked to violent extremism. But what we see is that there is poverty and lack of opportunities in other areas of the world too. But wherever we see that there aren't hidden agendas, we don't really see violent extremism, or we don't see that those communities are hit as strongly as ours are. So definitely there are other factors at work other than the ones that we read about and then that and the ones that we write about. So while we're on the topic of these grassroots communities, there are a lot of like work that is being done. We may or may not agree with the kind of work that's been being done, but this is a phrase that we hear a lot: countering violent extremism and work related to that. So, in your opinion, and all the work that you've seen being done, how do you think this is impacting peace building, and do you think that this is being done in a constructive and productive manner?
I think, like, people have really, I think they are well intentioned when they carry out their work regarding violent extremism in the communities. But then, like, what type of work they are doing, this is important. And have we seen, like, a significant change in the attitude and behavior of those for whom that work is carried out? And the third one is, like, have we, like, yeah, still experiencing violent extremism, or no, we have been successful in preventing it either through kinetic means or through, of course, the soft power approach that is, of course, based within the community to like, use soft power approach to prevent violent extremism. So I think so far, I mean, my own experience is that unless and until you don't, like, hit the, like you just said, the root cause of it, and one of the root causes is the total ignorance of the community regarding the religious text. And besides, like, the instigator, because the instigator comes strategically to target, like, their ignorance. And it is not the, like, that they are poor, it is because, like, they are total ignorant of the text of the Quran. And they, like, they sell their narrative, which is definitely based within the context of the Quran. But the selected text that is taken out from the Quran is without, they narrate it without the context. Jihad in which situation? वो कहते हैं jihad is फर्ज, मतलब when you hear Fazlullah's, like, sort of the speeches at that of that time, you will be so much influenced that without even referring to the Quran, you will say, yes, let me send my son, let me go myself, let me, like, contribute to this jihad myself. Now the weakness on the part of the other side, that we were not strategic in our approach. We never tried to counter the narratives of the extremist groups. And because the people in the the community by and large are ignorant, because Arabic is not our mother tongue, it is not our first language. And definitely we don't even try to read the Quran with the translation. So whatever is being, like, poured into our mind, particularly, like, we are like a clean slate, whatever was written on our mind, that become part of our, we internalize that. And when we internalize it, and particularly the Pashtuns, like, are Pashtun letters, but Muslim first. This is what they are. Sometimes they do it the vice versa, that we are the Pashtun first and Muslim first. But looking at the way the whole Pashtun belt has become, like, sort of have been radicalized, is because of that selected text of the Quran, that they were ready to kill, to be killed and kill others. So this is where actually I think we failed to address the violent extremism narrative effectively.
It's very fair to say that the rogue elements have been taking advantages of the gaps in knowledge that we have in our community regarding religious texts. At the same time, I feel like it's a point of concern that we're not using our resources to fill that gap. Maybe try and educate our community more upon what those things mean in context of the Quran, so that other people can't exploit that text and make them feel feed their own narrative to them. And maybe we should introduce a counter narrative, which is the actual narrative that should be propagated. At the same time, while we're talking about initiatives regarding peace building, do you have any examples to share with us that people could maybe follow or look up to in terms of countering violent extremism?
I want to respond to actually one of your statements that you made uh, in the statement that you just made. Basically, it's not countering only. It's we need to provide alternate narrative, whether that is in the form of a text or alternate options, so that, the root causes, so called the root causes, like lack of economic opportunities, lack of education, and lack of understanding, and lack of that social cohesiveness. I think if we really want to build a narrative, it has to be built in that context. The other thing is, alternate narrative to extremist narrative are based on these socio-cultural economic narratives, and the counter narrative within the context of the Quran should be based on the real, text of the Quran, where jihad does not mean killing others. Jihad can only be carried out when actually the state announces a state of jihad. The state announces. So only then this becomes a obligation on the common individual and the common citizen to carry out that jihad. Jihad in this situation, when you are geared up to kill another Muslim, and another human being, I think this is what we really need to be promoting through the social media, through our engagement with the communities, that you are killing not only an individual but the whole of community, as the Quran says. I think it is very important to understand the ground realities. People sitting in other cities and other parts of of the country would never understand the dynamics of those areas which are hard hit by violent extremism. So developing a preventing violent, it is not CVE, it's PV. We are preventing. We can only prevent. We counter only when it has happened. Initially, you really need to work towards the prevention of it. And how do you prevent it? You prevent it by actually taking up a whole of community approach, a whole of society approach, where you actually develop vertical and horizontal networks, where you actually develop and build within the communities some structures that are well informed, that are well capacitated, that are so empowered that they can actually address the issues of violent extremism on their own within their communities. And I'll give you an example from my work. And it is, when we were working, we just understood that it's a very challenging work. It's a very threatening work, and unless and until you have the will, a very strong will. I think steel is a small word if I'm using the will of a steel like will. No, it's much more than that. Only then actually you can carry out the work, CVE, PVE specific work, not only conducting just a procession or holding on placard in your hands that we are peace, we are building peace, or we are doing the sports activities. So we are actually we have brought people together, and sports is one odd activity through which you can do some of the peace building work. But when it comes to preventing violent extremism, you really need to know what are the early signs of violent extremism and radicalization in individual and the community. So it does not end up here that the signs are there. You really need to respond to it. How you are going to engage that radicalized individual and the radicalized communities to understand the negative impact of this radicalization on themselves and on their communities. So you need to carry out a sort of awareness raising at all levels in the communities. For that, you need to engage what type of people? People whose voices are trusted. And your voice also. If I'm just going there from Islamabad as a woman who doesn't know anything about the Pashtun culture, who doesn't know what are the grievances of these people, how have they suffered, and what are the gaps that exist and how to address those, I will not be accepted. So I have to have I have to be one of them, to understand the ground realities. And the second thing is, what you really need to do for PVE, you need to have an integrated approach. Now, what is integrated approach? You need to integrate not only economic empowerment into your whole violent extremism, preventing violent extremism phenomena, but also you really need to actually integrate peace education as one of the aspect that can be carried out not only in the communities. I'm not talking about community peace education. I'm talking about peace education in the educational institutions, because it is not only madrasas. And I think there is a misconception that it is the product of madrasas. We have de-radicalized more than 1,400 radicalized youth, and out of them, only 30% were were the product of madrasa. The rest of them were from the communities. So who influenced them? So this is actually, and then you really need to have a trust within the communities. So whatever I say, it is accepted. It is being and I'm trusted, and that's why the people will come to me. Then you have to have a community peace structure.
Yeah. So, everything that you said, every sentence that you were speaking, I was resonating a lot with a lot of things, which is why my question next is going to branch out into several smaller questions that I want to ask. Firstly, you mentioned that we do not know the realities sitting here or even sitting out of Pakistan, developing these interventions and these programs for CVE, which you also corrected that it's important to use the correct terminology, that we can only counter once something is already happening and it's at the state level. So we should use the words preventing violent extremism. So at the same time, going into the communities and learning about the root causes and empowering and trusting these communities to come up with their own solutions, because I'm sure that these problems exist in those communities. They are their problems. They have ownership of these problems. So they already know that they need to, they already have solutions. And we should be able to empower them to come up with their own. While we're on the topic of this, I would really want you to elaborate further for our audience the strengths that this bottom up approach has over the top down approaches where we just design a policy and we're just talking about the implementation.
Okay, actually, what I just said, the the communities, they know they don't know the solution. You really need to actually build their capacity to, uh, because they have never seen the type of violent extremism that started in those areas. When we would just talk to the mothers, the have you seen any change in your son? So one of them would just come up with, yeah, but that had always been like this. But then we would just elaborate. Okay, what type of change was it? Is it attitudinal? Is he's become more aggressive and things like that, which are associated with the, of course, as early signs of radicalization. Then they definitely would understand and realize that yes, it has happened. And excuse me, and the same is the case with the communities. In the communities there had been so much change taking place, but they did not realize that this change is not for the better, this change is for the worse. So you really need to educate them about the situation, and then definitely you really need to, it's a phenomena which is very new. I mean, and they had to learn, okay, now this is the situation with the son, how you are going to handle him. If this is the situation in the community, how you are going to address this issue. So you really need to educate them, and that's why I just said that for such a serious work, you have to have both the state and the communities working together, and then the solution definitely will come from the communities. And the communities are very effective because it is, they understand better the realities of their their areas. And of course they have the local solution. Like I just said, our model is called it's one of the innovative indigenous model for preventing violent extremism. Why? Because we empower the same communities who were actually already radicalized. So they understood, that what was my first sign of becoming a radical. And they knew, then how to prevent another person from becoming radical.
Oftentimes what happens is that whenever you come up with an initiative, whether it's like about gender equality or whether it's countering violent extremism, especially when you're associated with an international organization, people view it with a critical lens. They're a little suspicious about your intentions.
तो वही तो बात है ना. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If you are not you are not there, you don't understand the cultural dynamics, the sensitivity of the people's identities and beliefs, and you come up with an imported agenda, you will not be accepted. Why we are accepted? because we speak their language, we speak their mind, we speak their needs, we speak their requirements, we speak their beliefs, and that's why we are accepted. If you just look at their history, women coming out of the houses it was a taboo, and we actually brought women out and developed their capacity to be a peace builder, to be a voice of the other women.
Yeah.
So that means, you really need to understand the sensitivity of, the cultural sensitivity, and of course the dynamics of the area. Only then you will be able to intervene. Ours is more gender focused, not only responsive, it is gender focused.
We are thoroughly inspired by the work and proud of the work that Paramount Trust has been doing.
Thank you.
Because um, you guys have helped us understand how important it is to actually educate ourselves about the communities that we're going into, or maybe the communities that we're concerned about, before we even think about developing a program or an intervention. And we always talk about resistance this and resistance that these people aren't accepting of the ideas that we're coming with, and very rarely do we actually introspect and see, have we tried to educate on ourselves on the problems that really exist in those communities? Are we actually trying to speak their language, and not even like language, their like, are we supporting their narrative? Are we taking into consideration their needs? At the same time, I really want to ask you that. I'm curious to know, and I'm sure all of our viewers would be too. How do you at Paramount Trust measure your impact and make sure that the work that you're doing is long term?
Basically, I think, when we started all this work, and one of our the donors, they said, we do understand that measuring the impact of PVE is extremely difficult, because you take out the youth from those communities, you help them in the transformation of their minds and heart, who have undergone like a sort of that sort of negative transformation earlier, and you really want to positively transform them. And when they go back to your communities, and then all of a sudden they become the leaders of their communities, they volunteer for the social cause and the social work in the communities. That is, I think, enough of the impact that is generated through our intervention. And I can claim, and then I can just it's not anecdotal, because Tolana exists in 7 to 8 districts in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and also in Karachi. And the type of work that they are doing at the moment, I think everybody is full of praise for them. They work on early warning. They have actually prevented 13 incidents of violent extremism in their communities, and they have negotiated more than 200 local feuds and resolved the feuds that were of different natures, that were of family nature, that were of the hereditary ones, and inheritance inheritance and stuff like that. And so that's the impact that we have generated.
It's really important, and I truly believe that if you are educating and empowering your youth in these areas, you are planning for years and years to come, because they can go into their communities and be the leaders and actually not just educate those people around them, but also inspire other people to engage in these activities. So my final question in all of these podcasts has been, for people who watch us, and most of our audience is young people. So for students like me or other people who might be listening, who want to engage with the work that Paramount Trust is doing or other PVE efforts, what do you suggest that they should do? Where should they start with? And how can they play a part in this important movement?
I think for the youth, I would say, remain vigilant. Keep your eyes and minds open, because the type of ingress the other group makes, I think it's unobtrusive. We don't even realize, and then all of a sudden we become a part of the whole process. Yeah. So vigilance is one, and empowering oneself, knowing, learning, acquiring skills is so important for the youth of today. And just don't stick to the social media just for the sake of sort of spending your time. Spend it in something very beneficial for you as an individual, for your family, for your community and for this nation, which is passing through a very, very difficult and challenging time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those insights. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. We had some valuable insights today from knowing what it takes to work in the community, the type of challenges that these movements face, and the type of resilience that these people have built in these communities. Thank you so much for joining us for this podcast, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.